everybody. Today's the day that I finally talk about Native American languages. I'm very excited to do this, and I hope that you enjoy. Okay, so starting off, there's over 1,000 known Native American languages, and there's about 100 Native American language families that are proposed, as well as a smattering of isolates. More on that later. First, we're going to talk about some interesting Native American languages, and then we'll move on to the fun part. Part of the problem with thinking about Native American languages as an American, as a United Statesian, there's too many uses for the word American in this video. Kind of hate it. Anyway, as somebody born in the United States, I think of Native Americans as like these sparsely populated, kind of shoved off, forgotten, culture destroyed group of people. And that's because of where I live. There's only about 320,000 Native Americans living in the U.S., and not all of them even speak their native language. However, in the rest of the Americas, it's not the same story. In total, about 26 million people speak Native American languages. Most of those are in Mexico, into like Guatemala, and this kind of ring around Brazil. The Native American language with the most speakers is called Guarani. It has 6.5 million speakers, most of them in Paraguay, but also some in Bolivia, Brazil, and Argentina. What's interesting is Guarani is like co-official language with Spanish in Paraguay. And it accomplished this by doing something that other Native American languages didn't do. While Spanish moved in, the people who spoke Guarani learned Spanish, but also the people who spoke Spanish learned Guarani. Essentially, the whole group of people in Paraguay became bilingual. And today, that 6.5 million number, like, it's not all Native Americans, it's also people of European descent who speak Guarani as a first language in some places. So, that's really cool. It kind of shows what can happen when one group of people meets another group of people. Anything can happen. But it's one of those rare instances that was bound to happen at somewhere in the Americas. Another cool Native American language is called Zapotec, or Zapoteco is what the people who speak it call it. And there's not enough of a difference there for me to really care. The reason I bring up Zapotec is because I know someone who speaks it. So, okay, you guys know I'm a freak. I might be the biggest language freak. Okay, I know that's not true. There's always Paul from Lang Focus and that guy who speaks Old English. Oh, what's his name? Oh, I wrote it down. Simon. His name is Simon. And then there's the Polymathy guy. That guy's nuts. And then Che. You're a freak. But I'm weird, right? This girl I work with, she's Mexican. I know she speaks Spanish. She tells me that her parents don't speak Spanish as a first language. I just about freaked out. So I had to keep my calm because I'm working with this person. I don't want to freak her out. I was actually training her. I really didn't want to freak her out. And so I started asking her questions like, oh, well, what language do they speak? They call it Zapoteco. And I was like, okay, do you know if that's similar to like Nahuatl or like how the Aztecs? And she didn't know. And like, then I was like, so how do you say things like tobacco or like, corn or chocolate? And it turns out, you see, I'm asking that question because those things, A, exist in the Americas, but also B, are like, they almost have universal words for them because of imperialism. So it was either going to be that they were already exposed to those plants so they would have a word for them, or they got those words from the Spanish who took those plants and moved them down. Okay? So the word for chocolate in Zapotec I don't think is related to the word for chocolate in literally every other freaking language in the world. Like I just talked about this in my last video, how basically every language has the same word for chocolate. The Spanish took the Nahuatl word chocolatl. Look at my drinks video where I talk about chocolate, and they spread it all over the world. And everybody just took the word chocolate and put it in their language, except languages that were already exposed to the plant, the cocoa bean. The Zapoteco word for chocolate is different in different dialects of Zapoteco. But the most interesting to me is the one that looks like Nax. I don't know how to pronounce that. But I can't think of a way that would be related to the word chocolatl. There's also this one that starts with a DX, Jaladi, and Djaldi. I wrote it down on the screen so you guys can read that too. I can kind of see how that might be related, because the LADI on the end, I can see that being related to Lotl. Lottie and Lotl. I could buy that. Weirder things have happened with sound shifts, but I think that Nax one, Okay, now we're going to move on to the elephant in the room. What Native American languages are related? Are all of them related? I don't think so. You see, when I went into this research, I was like, okay, the Native Americans came across the Bering Sea Bridge. That's kind of like a choke point, right? So you'd assume that in some way or another, you might be able to find out that there is a big Pan-American language family. And I was definitely wrong. The Bering Sea Bridge existed for 7,000 years. So that's plenty of time for multiple groups of people to have moved across. And, as I talked about in my Polynesian video, there's arguments about whether or not peoples moved from the Pacific to the Americas, not via the Bering Sea Bridge, so that would also mess things up. And so that kind of makes it... You can't really use the history of the American peoples to know how it's all related. Also, while there are some general similarities in pronouns specifically, there's some repeated sounds in pronoun words in Native American languages, there really aren't very many connections that you can make in general between Native American languages. There are some proposed families. Some of them, I think, seem pretty strong. However, too many Native American languages have too many problems. They're dead. They didn't have a writing system. If they had a writing system, it wasn't decoded before we got rid of all the people who spoke that language. Or they all just died out on their own. Too many Native American languages, groups of people have been displaced from where they once were. It's not easy to tell what words are borrowed from other Native American languages that are just next to them that might be in a different family, or they might not be in a different family. That gets complicated. A lot of words get borrowed from European words, and they didn't write down what was going on with that. It's just bad documentation in general of the languages on the part of the Europeans, because they didn't really care about the Native Americans as people. You get what I'm saying. The list goes on. I think that the problems in the Americas linguistically are greater than the problems in Africa linguistically. Which is, I know that's kind of spicy to say, like, bad things happen in Africa that ruined the state of how we can even study their linguistics. But I'm willing to argue that through the guns, germs, and steel, worse things happen in the Americas for their linguistics. What I found interesting in my research for this video was how many specific alphabets have been invented, like just for Native American languages, that some of them are derived from the Latin alphabet. So, how I've already talked about before, a million times, the Egyptian hieroglyphs have led to our letters, are again leading to even more letters. That's cool. More letters are being born from this letter-writing family all the time. As recently as 2006, was one of them. That's cool. Like, that's really neat. I really don't know where to talk about this, but the code talkers in World War II, I don't know if this is just a thing Americans know about, so I'm going to talk about it. In World War II, the Navy used Navajo speakers to transmit coded information so that the Japanese couldn't understand it. Like, a Japanese person can learn English or French or anything that's a well-known language. But here America had this interesting resource of people who spoke a language that was not well documented and not related to very many other languages, and had this weird grammar that, first you have to decode what they're saying, and then you have to figure out what the words mean, and then I think that's really cool that we did that. Yeah, I also don't really know where to say this. The North American, like Canadian and United States attitude towards Native Americans was really aggressive, and it led to a destruction of a lot of those languages. However, specifically in like Mexico and Brazil and a lot of South America, it wasn't as aggressive. Like we as in the Anglosphere of the Americas wanted the Native Americans to be part of our culture, or worse, we wanted them away from where we wanted to live. Whereas in Central and Southern America, it seems that as long as they were Catholic, it was okay. And they could speak their language and do their things. As long as they believed in the same religion, it was fine. And is that kind of bad? I think it might be a little bit bad. You can make an argument for that. I'm sure it depends on who you talk to and where it was done. Like, the conquistadors were horrible, but it ended up better for the linguistics of those cultures because they can keep speaking their language. There are still people in Mexico today who speak a descendant of Nahuatl. They're called Mexicanos, and their language, while it has been definitely influenced by Spanish, is a descendant of the Aztec language. And I think that's really cool. Like, we don't have much of that up in the north here. So, anyway. I'm going to go on and end this here. Sorry about those last two rambles. I just felt like it was important to say those things, but I didn't know where to fit them in. Thank you very much for watching, Ling King. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And have a great day. Bye-bye.